Hello, my name's Derek Davidson. I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org and a certified Scrum trainer with the Scrum Alliance. In this Scrum video, I'll be outlining Scrum in less than 10 minutes. This video will provide all of the outline information you need to understand Scrum. I'll refer to the accountabilities, events, and artifacts of Scrum, describe how they work together, and briefly talk about the rules that bind these three elements together. This will provide a complete overview of Scrum, which we can later build upon with more detail. Everything you need to know about Scrum is contained within the Scrum Guide. It provides the only definitive description of Scrum. It's available, free of charge, from scrumguides.org and comes in multiple languages. It's also available in multiple formats: online, PDF, and audio. The entire guide is described in 14 pages. If we take away the title page, table of contents, and endnotes, we end up with 11 pages that explain the entirety of Scrum. As good as the Scrum Guide is, it only covers what happens once we've started using Scrum. Pre-Scrum activities are not covered. However, an example of typical pre-Scrum activities will help in understanding how Scrum works. So assume at the outset that a product owner has been selected and that they already have budgetary authority for creating our product. If we're fortunate, the product owner will then select up to 8 developers who will have all the skills needed to create the product. The developers then select a Scrum Master to help them. The resultant Scrum team of up to 10 people will be both self-managing and cross-functional. That is, they will have all the skills necessary to create value each sprint. They focus on one objective at a time, known as the product goal. One of the very first things a Scrum team will do is to create a product backlog. This is an ordered list of all the work needed to create the products. It won't be perfect at this stage, and that's okay, because we know things will change. We just need enough detailed work to enable us to get started. One other important piece of work includes the creation of a definition of done. This definition provides a common understanding of what it means when we say work is done. This list is an example only and is not exhaustive. There are many other things that could be addressed. Once we've got the preparatory stuff done, we're ready to start sprinting and applying Scrum per the Scrum Guide. One more thing that we need to discuss prior to talking about Scrum is the time box. A time box is a maximum period of time for an activity. The activity may finish early, but it must never exceed the time box. All activity in Scrum occurs within time boxes. The first of the time boxes is the sprint. The Scrum Guide describes the sprint as the heartbeat of Scrum, where ideas are turned into value. All work in Scrum is done within a series of time boxes called sprints. The time box for a sprint is 1 calendar month. Scrum teams may choose a shorter time box if they wish, but it's important that all sprints are of the same duration to aid with forecasting and planning. A common sprint duration in everyday use is 2 weeks. Note that there's no gap between sprints. A new sprint starts immediately after the end of the prior sprint. Once we start sprinting, we're always within a sprint until the product is finished or cancelled. Within every sprint, the first event is sprint planning. At sprint planning, the work to be performed in the sprint is planned by the collaborative work of the entire Scrum team. Time box for this event is 8 hours for a 1-month sprint, but usually shorter for shorter sprints. 3 topics are addressed. Why is this sprint valuable? What work can be done this sprint? And how will the chosen work get done? The product backlog items selected for the sprint, plus the plan for delivering them, is called the sprint backlog. A sprint goal is also crafted, which is an objective that can be met through the implementation of the chosen parts of the product backlog. With sprint planning complete, development work commences. The definition of done is used to assess when items and the increment are done. The next event is the daily Scrum, a 15-minute time box where the developers inspect progress towards the sprint goal and replan the next 24 hours if required. As the name suggests, this event is held daily during the sprint. Note that anybody can attend the daily Scrum, but only the developers may take an active role. Our penultimate event is the sprint review, held just before the end of the sprint. It has a time box of 4 hours for a 1-month sprint, usually shorter for shorter sprints. Here, the Scrum team and stakeholders inspect the increment and collaborate on what was done in the sprint for the purposes of gaining feedback. This feedback is often reflected in changes to the product backlog. Our final event occurring after the sprint review is the sprint retrospective. This event has a 3-hour time box for 1-month sprints, usually shorter for shorter sprints. Here, the Scrum team identifies the most helpful changes to improve its effectiveness. The most impactful improvements are addressed as soon as possible and may be added to the sprint backlog for the next sprint. During the sprint, the Scrum team will probably devote some time to product backlog refinement. This is where description, order, and size are added to or refined upon items in the product backlog. Planning and refining in this way enables Scrum teams to quickly and easily reflect changes in the marketplace, in technology, in potential use of the product, and in changing stakeholder requirements. Throughout this video, I've mentioned the Scrum artifacts. Each of these artifacts has a corresponding commitment. For the product backlog, it's the product goal. For the sprint backlog, it's the sprint goal. And for the increment, it's the definition of done. The commitments exist to ensure that it provides information that enhances transparency and focus against which progress can be measured. Put everything together and it looks like this. As one sprint closes, another begins, and so we start with sprint planning for the next sprint. This cycle continues until the product is complete or is cancelled. And that's the basics of Scrum. In this video, I've presented an outline of Scrum in less than 10 minutes. I've presented the 3 Scrum accountabilities: the product owner, developers, and Scrum Master. The 5 Scrum events: the sprint, sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective, and I presented the 3 Scrum artifacts and their related commitments. The product backlog, for which the commitment is the product goal, the sprint backlog, for which the commitment is the sprint goal, and the increment, for which the commitment is the definition of done. I also covered some of the rules that bind these things together. And that concludes this Outlining Scrum video. I've been Derek Davidson. Thanks for watching.